Okay, so we are here. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining in this third event in a series of online encounters, which we called Despite and Because on politics and poetics of collaboration across the Mediterranean. I'm Chiara Cartuccia, I'm the curator of Neither on Land Nor Sea, which is a program, biennial program at UNIDEE residency programs Fondazione Pistoletto. I'll give you just a little information about the program as such before we go into the event of today. Despite and because it's a series of monthly online talks that seeks to inquire into ways of organizing, commoning in the arts, bringing to the forefront some of the experiences that are currently inhabiting and activating Mediterranean spaces. The program invites curators, practitioners, facilitators from art organizations and projects that operate or have originated in the broader Mediterranean region to get together, so to discuss ways of practicing, curating, researching, caring, and struggling together at times within and through institutional, para-institutional, and collective settings. I'm very happy to be joined today by two beautiful organizations and projects, which is QANAT and Sakiya, in the person of Francesca Masuero, Shaima Nader, and Sar Kavazmi. I'm not going into much of a description of the two projects because the speakers will go into details on that, but just a couple of lines to give a sense what we are going to discuss. QANAT is a collective platform that explores the politics and poetics of water to reflect and act upon the multiple contextual understandings and forms of reproduction, production of the commons in Morocco, Palestine, and beyond. While Sakiya is based in Ramallah, Palestine, this is a progressive academy for experimental knowledge production and sharing, grafting local agrarian traditions of self-sufficiency with contemporary art and ecological practices. The event today is going to be roughly 1 hour and a half. The structure is as follows. We are going to have two presentations by QANAT and Sakiya, and then this will be followed by a moment of Q&A between both the speakers and the larger audience. You are very welcome to collect your thoughts and your questions and comments while the presentations are on, and we will keep them for later. In the meanwhile, please feel free to use the chat to already make your questions visible, and we will go back to them afterwards. We will start today with QANAT, Francesca and Shaima, and following by the presentation by Sahar. We need to tell you that we are facing some technical difficulties, so we'll kindly ask you to turn off the camera because we are struggling a bit with the connection at the moment, so we will do it. I'm giving a little introduction to our first speakers. They're running through their bios a bit. Francesca Masuero works as a curator, cultural organizer, and researcher. She's part of Le Suite, a cultural space in Marrakesh, Morocco, where she initiated QANAT. With a background in critical theory and political economy, she explores notions of resistances in multiple forms, including testing collective making processes within and beyond the art field, and researching the politics and poetics linked to watery words and to forms of being together otherwise. Since 2019, she has also been collaborating extensively with the Dar Balarj Foundation in Marrakesh, Morocco. Shaima Nader is an artist, curator, and translator from Palestine. For the past few years, she's been developing and organizing workshops and projects focused on forging and reactivating memories of and in the land through collective walking, listening, and fictioning to move towards decolonial land-centered imaginaries and practices. She's a member of QANAT, as you will see, and a PhD candidate in artistic research at ARIA at St. Lucas School of Art and University of Antwerp. So Francesca and Shaima, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Chiara, and all the team of UNIDEE for this invitation. really sorry that I cannot see your beautiful faces, but you will, you will see at least hear our voice and see some of the images that we collected for you. We're very excited also to be part of the modules that Chiara is putting together in Biella in the fall. We'll be there also with Nouha Benyebri from Tangier, from the cultural space Mahal. And we're very excited to be in this is something happening simultaneously between us in the last few months, but also because they will be joining us as well in October. Now, as a means of introduction, we sort of prepared a annotated diary that will hopefully offer some insights not only into QANAT and its activities, but also in the process of its making and remaking as a collective research and relational project. And as part of this, during the presentation, we want to offer you to listen to some of the sound works that are grounded in different bodies of water that we have either created directly or commissioned to other artists and comrades throughout various moments. And so before starting and to enter in this collective space of listening, I would like you to attune to Sing for Them to See, a piece composed by musician Maya Al-Khaldi about and for in Ayub, a spring in the village of Ras Karkar in Palestine, which is said to have healing properties. All right. Well, I remember well when Shima and I first met. It must have been October 2017, and she had just landed in Marrakesh for the first time, and I picked her up to lead her to Le 18, the cultural and residency space where I was and still am not only working but also living, and where we would spend the following 2 months together. Back then, I really could not imagine that this encounter and the project that was enabling it, QANAT, would turn out being the beginning of one of my most important personal and professional relationships for the first. And for the second, a collective and shared platform grounding in and branching across an increasing number of places 7 years later. In fact, earlier that year, Leila Hida, who is the founder of Le 18, and myself, had conceived QANAT as a punctual curatorial research program comprising artistic researches, an exhibition, and a series of conversations and walks involving cultural practitioners, architects, geographers, historians, and activists. And the starting point back then, and to a certain extent still today, was to delve into the politics and poetics of water as embodied by and embedded in the material and symbolic legacies of the QANAT, in Marrakesh specifically and in other parts of Morocco generally. The QANAT, or the Khitaras in Morocco and Darija, is a millennial subterranean water harvesting system that grounded the foundation of Marrakesh as a once archetype of a garden city, as you can see in the map on the screen. An extremely ingenious infrastructure, the QANAT exploit only the force of gravity to connect rich water tables, often at the bottom of the mountains. And in the case of Marrakesh, we're talking about the Atlas Mountains, moving this water towards semi-arid or arid plains. And so through that, the QANAT as an infrastructure did not only supply a semi-desert city in sustainable ways, but also embodied and shaped a specific social contract and a water culture grounded on principles of ecological care and solidarity, operating within and beyond the city borders. It goes without saying that this system materially belongs to Marrakesh past, as it was dismissed piece by piece by the so-called modernization of water management that was first imposed by the French colonial system and later by the independent Moroccan state. Marrakesh present is actually rather one of a touristic capital that is sold as the fantasized quintessence of the Orient, where while many of its inhabitants are forced to leave the historic neighborhoods of the Medina, the old town, to move to its poorly built new peripheral margins, these margins are actually now surrounded by 18 luxurious golf resorts, which is an unbearable number for a city in a semi-desert region. And so while the water table has dropped from 10 meters to more than 200 meters below ground in a few decades, the palm grove, which was historically the city's green lung and one of its main communal spaces for its inhabitants, is today half dried out and half transformed in an exclusive, secluded residential area. So the increasing enclosure of communal spaces, combined with socioeconomic and even stratifications and spatial segregations, have produced dispossession and inequality and a critical lack of livable space to assemble and socialize, entangled with deep environmental degradation. And it is by moving from this and from a desire to commit with some of the fractures and fragmentation that traverse Marrakesh, that the rhizomatic infrastructure of the QANAT became a bit our matrix to rethink how to relate to each other and our environments differently. Moreover, what became clear within 1 or 2 years from that first program in 2017 is that this body of water and earth made of hundreds of intersecting lines and circles, which is, by the way, translocally present across the Mediterranean, part of Asia and Southern America, would also become the aspirational image of a much richer and diverse project. In fact, if QANAT, the project, keeps thinking with water infrastructures as a way to engage with and learn from multiple manifestations of being in common in Morocco, it has also become a collective and multi-local action research platform that has been growing in many directions and places, nourished through time by predispositions, reiterated invitations, and friendships. And so throughout its still short history, it has been led at times by 2, at times by 3, or even 10 people, and involved a much larger number of contributors, so that fluidly like water and porously as the earthy walls of the Hikaras, the project has expanded through new channels dug by those that wish to join and share a specific research line or a particular methodology, adding a new word and a new world to our tentacular network. So while I hope the contribution of some of QANAT members will emerge throughout our presentation, I want to start sharing some thoughts related to the work and reflection of artist Jeanne van Eswijk, specifically in relationship to the practice that she calls of preparing for the not yet. In early 2019, I invited Jeanne to facilitate the second series of gatherings where I invited some artists, activists, and scholars, and that I had launched to sort of open up the possibility for QANAT to become a more collaborative platform. And well, in that moment, and most certainly partially thanks to Jeanne's capacity to hold space and enable listening, not simply collaborative, but actually collective sentiments from within a quite diverse group emerged and found articulation in a shared grammar. I would like to share some fragments from an article that Jeanne wrote, reflecting again on the idea of preparing for the not yet, where she asks, how can we feel that we have an agency as a collective body if we don't know the collective body yet? And how do we build collective understandings of a territory when territories are fractured? So what she argues is that preparing for such a not yet is a process of becoming. It is a balancing act between individual and collective needs, where it is critical to be able to let go, even if temporarily, part of yourself and allow to be affected by the ways in which others are and see the world. What she describes is then actually a practice of collective and collectively making that is based on what she calls, again, radicalizing the local, which means to root oneself with others in newly defined ways by listening carefully and understanding the different positions and capacities to take risk within a group, and by offering each other time and space to learn and unlearn from each other. So this practice of actively becoming in context is something that QANAT has been testing, starting with that first group in early 2019, a group that over time has expanded and then has also narrowed down, and that has been evolving ever since. Preparing for the not yet, though, also encapsulates a call for contextuality. It asks to deeply and effectively engage with and learn from the multiple flows that forge the otherwise, as these latter are reproducing radical imaginaries that already exist on the ground, and that are often embodied by either collective memories, vernacular knowledges, and by the many acts of resistance and solidarity that populate our city-states. This relation to place is something we feel very central to our work, and I want to offer some examples in relation to QANAT's work in Marrakesh specifically, as Shema will expand a little bit more on our work in other places. QANAT in general delineates a cartography that turns around the notions of memory, desires, and imaginaries, as it tries to interlace the reactivation of contextual collective memories of water and land ecologies and political and cosmologies with the creation of spaces to bring closer desires and practices triggered by them as a way to make emerge shared future imaginaries. We combine time spaces of collective learning and experimentation through workshops, public programs, research sessions. We commission and sustain artistic research, and we develop frameworks of dissemination that go from exhibitions to podcasts, to interventions in public space, to small publications that are all sort of imagined as entangled carriers to let sprout what we have gathered. Shema, you can move to next few slides. So, in Marrakesh, we have been exploring in particular the effects that the decline of the QANAT have had on our relationship to water, with the idea of the commons, of public spaces, and of being in common. We have been trying to map the existing legacies of this system and try to identify which meaningful spaces we can occupy to sustain those traces. This contextual learning process has increasingly involved different communities, starting with the cultural and research scene gathered around Le 18, to continue with the community of primarily women and children from the Medina, from the Old Town, through the alliance with the Foundation Dar El Large, which is a cultural space that neighbors Le 18 geographically. We're just 5 minutes away from each other, and which works intensively with various inhabitants of the old city to recenter their voices, knowledge, and practices as the heart of the cultural landscape and living heritage of the city. Within this vision in 2019, the director of Dar El Large, Maha El Mahdi, invited curator Image D and myself to design a yearly running program called the Collective Workshops that were thought, or they are thought, to enhance synergies and dialogue between our programs and communities by creating a learning space around the city's cultures, ecologies, and transformations, inhabited by participants and invited artists and researchers. So much of the action research that QANAT has been developing over the last 5 years in the city indeed owes to the rich and generous fields of knowledge, trust, and exchange that Dar El Large has been sustaining for over 20 years of activity. And so to give you some concrete examples in the framework of the collective workshops, for instance, sound artist and QANAT member Abdullah Hassak has been working with the group of the Mamandoué on sound art and radio techniques as tools to collect and transmit memories of intimate and communal spaces emerging from waterscapes such as public fountains, hammams, and khitaras, or also practices of neighborliness endangered by touristification and gentrification. The work of Darbellage has also allowed us to initiate a research line called Entangle Ecologies, started by agroecologist Riza Ras, architect Sarah Frikesh, artist Noureddin Zarraf, and myself, where over the course of 3 years, we have been unpacking the legacies of Marrakesh as a garden city, the current lack of green spaces and their entangled relation to the politics of food. This cumulative process led, for instance, in late 2020 to the creation of a community edible garden run by the women of Darbellage, and which since then has become a gathering space where we keep meeting pretty much on a weekly basis to plant, save seeds, harvest, cook, and sing. Another program I want to mention briefly to give you a sense of the fluid and multiple connections that have emerged from within and across Le 18, QANAT, Darbellage, but also other networks in Morocco, Palestine, and elsewhere, is Sharita. It's a project of artistic interventions in public and communal spaces in Marrakesh, which draws its name from a very common children game, in English, the hopscotch. And so just as the game does, the Marelle in French does, Sharita tries to adopt and engages with the street and creates ephemeral, otherwise inexistent playgrounds, focusing on some of the dynamics affecting Marrakesh. Started in 2018 by Rim Mejdi, with whom I later started the collective workshops I was just talking about, Nuha Ben Yedri, who is the curator based in Tangier, which will join us in Biella, and myself, as at the time we were part of another collective that now doesn't exist anymore, called the Madrasa. Since 2020, so since its second edition, Sharita was sort of adopted by Darbellage, which allowed us to sustain the program, but also to combine further artist-led interventions with citizen-led ones that sort of formalized some of the research and work that we had been developing through QANAT and the collective workshops across different neighborhoods of the city. And over the last 2 years, we decided to invite artists and researchers to explore, in particular, the palm grove and different bodies of water in Marrakesh and in other Oasian regions in Morocco, bringing this latter in dialogue with practices and research that is emerging from other localities along and partially beyond what some have called the aridity line. And so while Mauritius Italian artist Matti Giuri has been critically looking into the making of the palm grove as the ultimate dreamscape, a puzzling and selectively accessible image of paradisiac opulence, Palestinian farmer and artist Yara Douani has explored the possible connections or reciprocal learnings between drought-resistant farming practices in Palestine and in southern Morocco. While artist Joumane Milaboud offered to walk through the Marrakesh palm grove by listening to how water sites embed folk tales and rites, expanding on her body of work around Palestine's water springs and spirits, which, by the way, is a research that she developed also with Sakiya, I believe. Artist Islam Shabana has been drawing connections between the history and speculative potentials of in risk of drowning underground cisterns in Alexandria, Egypt, and increasingly dried underground reservoirs in Morocco. What I want to share with all this is that actually beyond their existence in the time space of the festival itself, not only the work, but primarily the relationships and friendship first enabled there have partly already and will certainly continue to unfold further into new channels, circles, and pools of connections from Morocco to Scotland, from Palestine to Italy, and who knows where else. We can maybe come back to this in the discussion, but for now, and staying with the fluid overflow of information, and I hope you could follow. And before I invite you to listen with us to A Piece of Water by Abdullah Hassak, and let yourself be moved by matter becoming other matter, and by the sounds of melting bodies in contact.
Thanks a lot, Fra. Now I will briefly go through some of our most recent multi-sited collaborations and projects, encompassing a series of site activations and experimentation in post-medium artistic and pedagogical tools to navigate and rehearse embodied forms of care and resistance through facilitating moments of collective learning, reflection, and world building. زرعوا فأكلنا نزرع فيأكلون is an Arabic proverb roughly translated as they planted, so we ate, we plant so they would eat. A wisdom rooted in present acts of care towards unidentified future others, the generations yet to come. To me, it also reflects the spirit of social and political organization that proliferated in Palestinian society during the first Intifada or uprising between 1987 and 91. The same spirit reverberated across Palestine during following uprisings and the pandemic, an attempt to reclaim authorship of the future, of social networks, of land, characterized by a heightened degree of self-reliance. That sense of urgency that developed and develops our networks of care, or in Palestinian Arabic slang, faza'a, to rise collectively to help is recurrent, and we're experiencing it constantly in different shocks, intensities, spaces, and locations. Developing these networks requires the reclamation, protection, and creation of alternatives and more, even if temporary spaces and moments of learning, planning, organizing, and rehearsing for this not yet, that's already here and happening. Meeting each other at moments that seem like the end of the world. Suspended Roots, or جذور معلقة, was one response project driven by this desire to create space and dig through the ground to connect and reach each other locally and regionally in informal spaces of encounter. The project was hosted by Sliman Community Farm, which is located in the village of Bilain, west of Ramallah, and established on lands liberated from the Israeli settlement of Madain elite, occupying the land, air, and view across the valley. Sliman Farm is one example of such spaces of communal learning and undertaking generative acts of resistance rooted in issues of seed, soil, and popular pedagogy, or land as pedagogy, and is now an important incubator and partner in several projects. Through different walks, screenings, and discussions with farmers, agricultural activists, and researchers in environmental movements from Tunisia, Morocco, Palestine, The aim was to create yet another reflection on the entanglement of our economic and political realities, and root in each other's experiences and attempts to generate possibilities to disrupt the status quo concretely. Learning from models of sit-in camps in Amidar, southeast of Morocco, or how to sustain presence on a land threatened by annexation, or starting multiple and local seed banks and libraries, as we saw in Jumana Mannah's film, Wild Relatives. These encounters, conversations, learnings, and solidarity networks that unfold in the process of art making or art sharing also create spaces of rehearsal for anticipating the future or presence existing, but we do not yet have to face. There are also spaces of prefiguration through which the sought future is brought into being through enactment. In context of dispossession and displacement, material and immaterial acts of violence culminate in what sociologist Boaventura de Sousa Santos called epistemicide, a systematic destruction of rival forms of knowledge and being in the world. Echoing this notion, in an attempt to propose a symbolic act of resistance to these erasures, we experiment with writing and with fiction. Here, I quote Walida Emarisha. Whenever we try to envision a world without war, without violence, without prisons, without capitalism, we are engaging in an exercise of speculative fiction. All organizing is science fiction. Organizers and activists dedicate their lives to creating and envisioning another world, or many other worlds. So what better venue for organizers to explore their work than through writing science fiction stories? Following this line, we organized a speculative fiction writing workshop entitled Hydro Futures in Marrakesh, just a few weeks before the outbreak of COVID and the quarantine in 2020. Throughout the workshop, participants engaged in drawing and writing exercises, short readings and screenings to explore the genre and its historical connections to social and political movements across the world. Throughout the workshop, sci-fi was used as a methodology to rethink architecture, technology, and social relations in order to commit to climate and transformative justice in the future. Rather than waiting for the future to arrive, we thought, the act of writing speculative fiction is one way of engaging directly with it. Indeed, it is one process of thinking how to build a better society, how to avoid potential, probable, ecological, economic crises, and how to understand our present and past, what could have been, what it can be like. On a practical level, it is one way of proposing an alternative or a multitude of new counter futures than the ones we are presented with. Another project that we developed, and I would like to introduce you briefly to, as a way to think about forms of imagining, research, and making, is called The Waves, a group exhibition and series of events with an incredible group of artists, poets, musicians, and historians held at Chapter Gallery in Cardiff. We already listened to one of the works from the exhibition by Maya Khaldi, and we'll be listening to another by Bint Mbareh at the end of the presentation. Beginning in conversations connected to the waters in each of our localities, the sea springs or lack thereof in Ramallah, the underground waters and channels in Marrakesh, and the meeting of the estuary and the sea in Bari. We each invited, we're 3 curators, so each one of the curators, invited 2 artists to join a collective dialogue and develop and share new work relating to their practice and own relations with different waters. From here, we spoke together of interconnected intimacies and convergences of fictions, words, and worlds carried through water, songs, stories, histories, and sound. And through group conversations with the artists, many common threads and concerns emerged between their individual ways of thinking and making. To counter erasure in context of dispossession and displacement from Egypt to Morocco to Palestine to the UK and the US, and pursue active and critical remembrance, Fern Thomas, Maya Khaldi, Bint Mbareh, Candace Shibon Walker, Nuruddin Sarraf, and Alia Msallam spoke, mapped, drew, stitched, wrote poetry, knitted, carried stories, and sang. To offer a brief dive into the beautiful works these artists made as an example, and if anyone is curious about the rest of the works, we can talk about them more in the discussion afterwards. Candice presented a film installation which centered on teaching herself to weave a cyan fishing net, the style of net the artist's father makes. Through this weaving, Candice explores ways of returning to indigenous ecological knowledge, ways of connecting with ancestral traditions, where water is figured as memory, ecology as future, community as cosmology, mythology as knowledge. Whereas Nuruddin created a series of drawings on fabric that considered how colonial geometries of extractivism and the modernization of water management fundamentally altered social, temporal, cultural, and agricultural practices in the village of Aghmat in Morocco. Tracing different bodies of water and their technologies, Nuruddin followed the different modes of belonging these interwoven water infrastructures encapsulate. And now, before we hear from Sakiya about their incredible work, we will listen to Saad al-Khabaya, one of 4 tracks composed by Bint Mbareh from her installation Stellar Footprints. Thanks everyone for listening.
سعد الخبايا بتفتل الصبايا سعد الخبايا بيطلعوا الحياة سعد الخبايا بتفتل الصبايا سعد الخبايا بيطلعوا الحياة سعد الخبايا بتفتل الصبايا سعد الخبايا بيطلعوا الحياة سعد الخبايا بتفتل الصبايا سعد الخبايا بيطلعوا
Thank you very much, Laima and Francesca, for a beautiful presentation. I turn on the video just a second to see if Sahar is here, because she's cutting off quite a lot, unfortunately, today, so that's a big issue. I saw that she was disappearing, popping up again. So Sahar, are you here? Can you hear us? Try writing, but doesn't work. One thing that we can do, being optimistic that Sahar is going to reemerge from this internet of darkness. Maybe if you have already some question from Francesca and Shaima, we can already engage in a bit of a conversation just to give to buy some time. Feel free to either write, or if you want to just raise your hand and talk directly. I can also start with something. First of all, thank you so much. I really appreciate the presentation, and especially also the sonic moments that allow to enter and exit the different chapters of it. As Francesca was saying, Sahar, you're here.
Hello.
I was doing a little, how is it going?
Okay, I hope the connection is better now. Oh my God.
It's been
Okay,
really,
so
yeah.
we move on it because I was buying some time, but I mean we go back maybe afterwards to question to Francesca Shema, and I introduce you very briefly. Hopefully that won't ruin the magic of this moment, of this connection moment. So Sar Kavazmi is co-founder and director of Sakiya. She worked as an architect, restorer, planner, and cultural heritage expert with PRIVAC, Center for Engineering and Planning, and other local and private institutions. In 2012, Sahar coordinated the first edition of Kalandia International and co-wrote the first of PRIVAC's Rewalk Heritage Guidebook series. In 2016, she co-curated the Ramallah municipality's exhibition for Kalandia International Third. She was an architect fellow at Akademie Schloss Solitude in Stuttgart, Germany in 2014-15. Sarah received her BA in architecture from Birzeit University and her master in architecture from Miami University. She's here to talk about Sakiya. So Sahar, if you can try and share the presentation, that would be amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chiara. I will stop my video. Hopefully that will help with the connection. And I will try to share my screen. It's taken a while to share. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm having a problem sharing my screen, and also I've been having a problem sending my files. I've been trying to do that for many hours now, but the hours keep increasing. So I will suggest that I will try, and I didn't realize that the internet would be this bad. I will try to contact my colleague in Ramallah because he has the same slides on his computer. He might be able to share them. So if you give me just a few minutes, I'm very sorry about this.
No worries. I mean, what we can do is we can talk a bit, have a little bit of a Q&A moment with Francesca Shema, and in the meanwhile, you can try it out. No worry.
Yeah.
So I turn
Thank you so
on
much.
no worries. I mean, happens. It's normal.
Yeah,
I turned
and I
on
was
the
listening
video.
to Francesca and Shema, and I missed a lot of it, but it was amazing, poetic, and really inspiring. So thank you so much, and I'll try to keep listening to your questions and answers as I get in touch with my colleague. Thank you. I'll be back soon.
Thank you so much, Sahar. Really appreciate it. So I turned on the camera just a bit because so we can talk. Yet again, I encourage you, if you have any question, if you are shy, just write. I can also just read, don't worry. So yet again, it's been very fascinating presentation, Chairman and Francesca. I'm very, very happy, very glad that you represent QANAT in such a poetic manner, which I have no doubt about because it's very much part of the program, I feel. I would like to expand on something that, of course, I find it's so instrumental both to the project as an organization and to many of the topics you touch upon through the projects, which is this idea of the collective capacity of tackling nodes of interest that is never exhausted, which is participates both in the reasoning and in the methodology. In your case, I feel I was very, I've been following your work for quite some time now, and I'm always very struck by the way you use certain terms like care and trust in a way that doesn't feel at all metaphorical, comes with the work, like the act of making things together. And I wanted to go to the beginning. When you get together, you start planning, as Francesca was saying, and thinking about QANAT as a shared effort. And you always had in mind this kind of, making the space, create condition to welcome others and be influenced or even changed by the presence of other collaborators. And how do you deal with it as differently, maybe as years passed by and things moved in a different pace, I can guess, since the beginning.
I don't know if you had I didn't catch an exact question, more I guess maybe expanding on it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I
mean, I can start, and I'm sure we can complement each other with Shema. I feel from my perspective, there is something that I think I've learned intuitively also, because it's something that I didn't share much during the presentation, and I think it's worth sharing now, is that I think that there is and there was a power and something very special in the fact that QANAT was born within Le 18, which is it is a cultural space, but it is a home. I mean, it's hosted within a home and a house, and actually until 2019, the residency itself was within its wall in itself, and I think that has affected, in terms of affection too, a lot of the relationships and conversations that emerged for those that have been then become part of the collective itself, and starting with Shema and myself. I mean, I think that maybe first of all we became friends, and we became friends because we became housemates. Pragmatically. So I think there is a sort of, there is a way of doing that we're still fully understanding, or that I'm fully understanding, that comes also from the type of space that in which you're able to exist together in a group, whether it is 2 people or 4 or 5 or 10, and giving attention to create those spaces is actually the first, to me, it's the most important element to allow for something that is called a collective to exist. And that also comes from my own personal experience within QANAT, but also within the, I briefly mentioned at one point, I guess I spoke about a lot of stuff, but one of the projects that today exists as a collaboration between QANAT, Darbellages, and UNIDEE, which Sharita was first created by a different collective that was dispersed across a number of countries. We were 8 at first, 4 in Morocco, but only 2 in the same city, and somewhere in Jordan, somewhere in Egypt, somewhere in Europe. And this physical distance has been, to me, one of the limitations that hasn't allowed that collective, for instance, to keep existing. And even QANAT had moments in which, particularly between 2019, 2020, until the pandemic, or shortly after the pandemic, where there was really a group of almost 10 people directly involved in organizing, thinking about its different dimensions. And again, because not all of us were able to keep the same pace of committing to each other, of course, to the project, but also to spend time with each other. In that case, specifically, the collective or the project didn't stop, but its shape and its core changed over time. And I think it's totally fine to allow for that change to happen. I think it's natural. I really like when Jean Evanesi says that a collective is an activity. You know, it implies there is a work that you have to put in it. Yeah, I guess I'll start with that.
Yeah, I also keep going back to, I mean, not to repeat the same things, but like being, I mean, Le 18 was a big part of it, like being in a home, but also it made everything, I mean, it's a friendly space. I mean, it's an art space. It's not, but it's not. It's really an art home. It's a container of projects, and everyone has a different relation to that space. Like, I think many of us have lived there for residency or like while working there at different moments. But it also, because it contains and it's a home to so many different projects, and it's a space for everyone, or like for a lot of people to use, to propose and use it. And that's what allowed a lot of projects to root and develop at different moments and different times. And I think with QANAT it's kind of the same thing, but more like it's a person's container. So QANAT also became the spot where everyone has different ideas. We pitch, and then maybe it's not the moment to do it now, but maybe after 4 years. And that's why the collaborations, they were happening at different moments with different people. And somehow, yeah, I mean, it was, I don't know, QANAT was like, at one moment we were saying it's between 8 and 12, 8 and 30, I don't know like how many people, because it was growing and shrinking. And now, especially maybe after the last 2 years, like after we did Call the Waves in Cardiff, and like it was a 1-year project, like with amazing people, and Confluence that we didn't mention, which was an exhibition we both curated with another curator, Alaya Ang, at CCA in Glasgow. There was like also another project between different locations. And it feels like now the conversations are just going in so many amazing directions, and everyone is excited. Like everyone is really excited, like because we work, thinking maybe like a lot of the people who are in this chat, like we work probably on very, very similar topics. And it's just always really exciting to meet people who are excited about doing other projects. And that's, I don't know, I forgot the question, but this is how it's happening. We're just meeting, we get excited together, and then we do something, and then it ends or it continues and becomes something else. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I see Sahar here. So I don't know if it's they are ready to try. Perfect. We can see it.
Okay, so I'm back. You can see my screen, right?
All good.
Right, finally. Um, okay, thank you so much for your invitation, and thank you, Shema and Francesca, for the amazing presentation, amazing work. I'm really inspired, and I noticed so many connections and intersections, and I'm really excited about having this conversation open up into even more collaborations. So I want to start with speaking about Sakiya, and I will start with context. Uh, we have a site. So Sakiya was established in 2016 as a nomadic project, and in 2018 we were given the privilege to be able to work on this incredible site in Ain Kenya, which is a village a few minutes west of Ramallah. We worked nomadically even before 2016, but we had different names. Nida Sunukrot, my partner, and I did projects in the city of Ramallah. We were also working with a project in Jericho. But since we started working in Ain Kenya in this site, our work has started to take a more site-specific shape, and a lot of our practices are inspired from the site and from the village of Ain Kenya. What you see here is part of the hill where we're located. It is in Area C, and if you know land designations in Palestine, since the Oslo Agreement, which is a peace agreement between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli occupation, you will know that Area C is an area completely under Israeli control. And so it is an area that has a lot of different Israeli settlements, illegal Israeli settlements. It's also a place where it is illegal for Palestinians to build. Sometimes it's illegal for them to grow food, build fences, access water, graze sheep and goats, etc. So there's a lot of limitations. There's also rules that forbid Palestinians from foraging, such as foraging for seasonal herbs like za'atar and sage, thyme and sage, and other things. So this is where our site is located, and in the background you will see parts of the city of Ramallah. So with this picture, we're looking east, and we're looking at some expansions of the city of Ramallah into some suburban looking neighborhoods that are inspired architecturally and in terms of planning by a lot of Israeli settlements that are to the west. So our site is surrounded from the west by Israeli settlements that occupy the hills of Ain Kenya and other villages. And to the right, you will see the city of Ramallah expanding over the different eastern hills. This is our site from the village of Ain Kenya. And as I said, as a site that is rich in ecology and historic infrastructures, a lot of our work is inspired by it. And one of the most important aspects of our work is the protection of natural resources. I wanted to start speaking about water since also QANAT's work is, a lot of it is concerned with water. We work in an area where historic QANATs or underground water systems have been dug and built within the hills for thousands of years. We access water from a historic aquifer that existed for thousands of years. We get our water from what is called the mother of all water in this hill. And this mother cistern provides water to more than 12 other springs in the area. We're lucky to have one of the springs here, and artist Jumana Emil Aboud that Francesca mentioned was working at Sakiya for over a year with a group of people to learn about these springs, their histories, stories, spirits, traditions, practices around them, etc. I will speak more about artist Jumana Emil Aboud in a little bit. So as a small organization that is concerned with environmental protection and art and the intersections with ecology, local practices, and agriculture, a lot of our work is concerned with pedagogy and educational programs stem mostly from being in touch directly with the land, its resources, and working directly with the master builders on site. The different aspects of our site also help us draw maps and connections between our different programs. So our programs are very strongly embedded within the site's features and aspects, but then a lot of these programs organically are created organically through the interaction with the different site parts, the historic trees, the different fire, wood burning stoves, the different animals on site, the different buildings, and of course the water. And from these connections and from being on the land and creating practices that are deeply embedded within the land features, different programs come about. And here is a few posters of some of the projects that we did over the years. So the first one to the left is an educational program with the architecture students in Beirut University and also Arab American University, where the studio moves to the land and architectural creations, interventions, and learnings happen on site through learning natural building and experimenting with renovations and using materials to build a new temporary structures on site. There's also infrastructure as art, where our infrastructures are open for learning, interpretation, and learning. Rewilding pedagogy is one of our most important projects because pedagogy happens all the time. It's a continuous process of learning through engagement and hands-on work and workshops. And then the last is the work with Jumana Emil Aboud that is concerned with the work of water diviners, looking for water, learning, telling stories, learning about the skirts. There's a lot more different projects and activities that take on a very seasonal character. So our work at Sakiya is seasonal, where in the spring we collect seeds. We plant seeds. We do a lot of walks to learn about the different plants. We do a lot of foraging walks, reading and collecting, and artist residencies. And then in the summer, it's a time where we share a lot of this food that has been planted. So sharing of knowledge and sharing of food from the garden. And then in the fall, there's more of the archiving aspects of things, and in the winter it's preparing for the next year. So our work is very seasonal in that sense. And one of our programs is an internship program and an apprenticeship program, where young people either come through their universities to learn renovation, agriculture, intersections with art, natural building, and work with artists, or they learn to become restorers, builders, who would go on also later to take part in other projects around the city of Ramallah and even further and beyond. And as we work on site, we also engage with a lot of craftspeople all over Palestine, engaging with traditional craft that a lot of times has been either disappearing or threatened to disappear. And these experiments go beyond the work of the immediate craft production into learning deeply about the different materials, their environmental use and technique and importance, and experiments where these materials are put into on-site, but also in labs. So in these different pictures, for example, you will see our work with ceramicists and clay, where students locally and internationally engage with building with these clay pots and learning through adjusting these clay pots with wind and sun, the environmental qualities, creating wind tunnels or creating cooling systems, fridges, traditional fridges, etc. Also creating architectural, modular buildings that could be documented and then moved on, learned from, and hopefully put to use by other people in other places as well. And through our art education and summer school programs, we work also with artists who work with students from the village and elsewhere. We're engaged with physical learning, so climbing, yoga and meditation, rope walking, etc. Building using your body and your hands, observing and listening, etc. And so engaging with all your senses on site, but also working with artists and celebrating. I think, please let me know if I need to go faster. I can also go through these a lot faster. So in our internship program, our students engage directly with the work of the builders. So our buildings have been renovated with the help of so many volunteers and so many students. And when you come and look at our buildings, you will see the different experiments. And so, for example, when it comes to pointing. We use different soils and muds and materials that exist on site. And so the wall itself becomes this canvas for experiments where different groups of people are experimenting with different mixes, and these mixes are put on the walls, and then it is documented. Then over time, we look at the interactions between these different mixes and the environment, and we then able to register the outcomes of such mixes and share them. And of course, we're also engaged with classes in Birzeit University and Arab American University, and also some international universities where students class move to site, and the site becomes their classroom and their laboratory for experimentation. So a lot of experimentation, a lot of process-oriented work rather than focusing on the outcomes and the final products. So a lot of work that turns into a lot of stories for learning and experiments for learning. And an artist residency program where artists engage with the site and very closely with the people of Ankenia and students as well. Artists also create works that engage the larger public through either events or publications. Here's Jumana Emil Aboud, and the writers Byron Palomamas, and the works span from infrastructural works that are like physical interventions on site that are permanent interventions, and ephemeral mythologies, but sustainable ephemeral mythologies, like in the work of Jumana Emil Aboud. And the work that is more experimental, that's more educational, that takes on the forms of workshops, like the work of Al-Wahat, who were experimenting with sabr, which is cactus, the fibers, the plants, the cochineal, which is the bug that attacks the cactus, and learning, relearning what it means to be these aspects of indigeneity, local migration, etc., and really reflecting on these words and these terms through plants onto our larger contexts globally. Of course, celebrations that also use a lot of permanent installations on site, such as the installation on the right, which is a fire pit that is inspired by the cosmology that is first established by Islamic theorists more than 800 years ago. And the farm is another aspect of our work where this engagement has to happen through also the creation of food or the making of our food, and it starts with the seed. And so we plant our food, we care for the garden through our students, our guests, our artists, and then of course we collect it and we have lunches together almost every day. So whoever is on site will eat together, our workers, builders, volunteers, students, artists, guests, whoever is there. So we engage with these collective meals on a daily basis, and this is where a lot of our conversations happen, and a lot of our ideas and activities then are inspired and are planned for the entire year. And we engage with exhibitions that happen on our site, like at Sakiya. And in this picture, you see the work of a Palestinian artist, Samia Halabi, who was an artist in residence at Sakiya. She's a painter, and here she used natural materials from site. and created different crayons and different colors and pigments on site. But also we engaged with international exhibitions, like this exhibition at the Royal Gardens, Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh, where we engaged with the Botanic Gardens archive, the plants that were collected from Palestine that were deemed weeds that were attacked by the British mandate in the 20s and 30s. So 33 plants in Palestine were considered weeds, and there were the British mandate farming experts were interested in getting rid of these plants because they were destroying the aspects of more large production of wheat in Palestine. And of course, by attacking these plants, there has been an introduction of a lot of chemicals, and of course, an attack on a lot of communal aspects of land, work, and agriculture in Palestine. We translated these plants into these wood boards that reflected the building's architecture, because there was boards in the building that had the vine trees, and so like also reflecting on aspects of class within buildings and within plants, and how they translate into understanding the different classifications of plants, but also engaging with sound art that was developed with the artist Dina Amro bint Mbareh, who worked with Sakiya on songs related to water, irrigation, water calling in dry seasons, water stories, historic water stories, but also water stories that she wrote with her mother and sang with her mother. So we created these vessels with the clay makers in Palestine. We took them to Edinburgh, and we played the songs of Bint Mbareh, and also the stories that were collected by Junana Emil Aboud. So this was like a room for water singing and water sounds, and the other room was for weeds taking over the architecture of the building. We engage also with publications, so all of this knowledge is collected in publications that are distributed and used also as our summer school curriculum. And most importantly, I think, is celebration. So celebration of land, celebration of bringing back common communal practices and collective practices in the face of strong privatization and destructive development, and also in the face of settlement expansions in Palestine. And a lot of our celebrations happen through stories, songs, and communal cooking, as in this picture of a collective table. And also projects that are done collectively, like this project with the women in the village, where the women established master plans for Ain Kenya, for the future of Ain Kenya, where the master plans are put forth to the village council and the city of Ramallah to consider before planners come and make decisions from top down on the future of the village. And this happened in the oldest woman in Ain Kenya. She's sitting down in her traditional dress here. So her home was the host for all these different women, young and old, who were drawing and thinking and imagining the future of the village, and where their work was translated with the help of Natasha Aruri and Yara Bami and May Battat into these beautiful boards. And this is it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and sorry if I took longer than I should.
Thank you so much, Sar. Actually, thank you for keeping up despite the technical problems. And thank you for a very rich presentation of an incredibly diverse programming that you have at Sakiya. I won't take much more time for possible conversation to follow. So yet again, if you have any question, feel free to ask, raise your hand, and we come to you. I wanted to ask, maybe to start with, if you have, Sahar, Shema, and Francesca, any questions for each other. I think it's an interesting thing to witness when we have this kind of encounters between projects.
Yeah, maybe I'll start. There's so much that I want to speak to Francesca and Shema about. It's very rich and so beautiful. Like, it's really, really beautiful. You feel like you want to be part of all of these engagements, walks. I mean, I feel very strongly like Shema as well, and Francesca, towards the act of walking, using your body as a sensor, but also as a measure of things. And I feel like this connection to QANATs have this relationship to scale, to infrastructure, to architecture. And I was interested in asking about your engagement with public spaces, because I feel like that could be the most challenging thing, working public space, especially in maybe the Arab region, where there's a lot of political encroachments or political aspects that would make it hard for people to engage and feel free and open in public spaces, and it would feel harder for people to also want to engage in public space and be open in public space. And so this openness, like, how were you able to cultivate this openness in these spaces that are open, artistic, and also educational for your communities?
Shema, do you want to start, or shall I go for?
Yeah, I'm thinking, Balki, maybe maybe you can talk a little bit more about Marrakesh, because it's like, it's not also so easy. It comes with a lot of permits and applying and getting rejections and all of that. But I let Francesca speak about it. That is actually really not easy. But I think maybe humor is one way to deal with all of it. I think from the side of the artists and the organizers. But like, I remember, Sahar, like you also know this. I mean, it's I'll start with the positive, is that like, it's always when you do a walk or like something that's outside of at least outside of the city, everything, like how people interact is always completely different. Like how you sit, how you have a conversation, who you talk to, where you place yourself. And so it's always, I think it started as as something that we do on the side of projects, just to get together and walk, also to explore where we are, like to locate ourselves kind of geographically. And then slowly, somehow, it always became part of our like projects and programming all the time. And we always kind of start with it. I mean, that's part of the discussion with UNIDEE also, like for the course in October, is we always feel like the easiest way to connect with other people is being outside and just walking and making something to eat together. That's part of it. But I remember, like, for example, I mean, I remember it's also a point of conflict. Of course, in Palestine, it's heightened because of the situation. But I remember a couple of a couple of years ago, when I was working on suspended routes, one of the walks that we did was between Springs and Aboud, so like a village, can't remember, west, east of Ramallah. Anyway, so we were walking between Springs, and the moment we got into the valley, a group of armed settlers came, like with their dogs, with their jeeps, and then we have a group of 30 people walking in the valley, no connection. I'm organizing. I was panicking because also the group was divided on how to deal with it, and that was a really difficult moment because you don't know what to do. But it's also a moment of, I mean, that's also what we're doing, you know, like having this conversation. We were having it around the spring. It wasn't so chill. It was really, I was really freaking out, but it was, you kind of let go and you let the group decide at the end. And it's not as easy as that because you're caring for people's safety. But I think that was one of the extreme things that I had to deal with when we were organizing an event. But most of the time, I think, it's that. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, yeah, I will stop here. But it's just letting the group, I mean, the participants decide. And I think with a lot of the workshops and the events that we do, like we have a solid plan always. Like we try to do a choreography of how everything will go, and it never does. It's good to have a plan, but it's always, it becomes a mess at the end when you have a lot of people and a lot of people jumping in, you know, and joining. And yeah, so Francesca, I let you talk about Marrakesh.
I think that in the framework of Marrakesh, it's interesting because there are certain, and we actually started doing things outdoor in public space. And I'll talk about Sharita after, but also within the programming of QANAT from the very beginning. I remember in 2017, there were already a few walks, for instance, that we organized with a geographer around all the gitaras in the palm grove, even in the Medina with an architect that has been really studying the way in which the Medina has sort of developed through its underground waters. So we sort of navigated the city by following an invisible water trace in a way. And those were sort of activities, even the one in the Medina that to a certain extent passed, possibly thanks for once to the touristical dimension of Marrakesh. And objectively, sometimes when there is a white person in the group, that really helps vis-a-vis authorities. That's just a fact. I mean, there is a massive discrimination in that sense for everything in Morocco at large, and in Marrakesh specifically, I would argue. Having said that, Sharita was really something we wanted to start to sort of challenge ourselves in a way, and to try to exist outside a safe space that could have been Le 18 or Dar Village, and knowing that once you do it, as Shima said, we generally have 5 different plans for how Sharita can turn out being, because no matter how early you submit authorizations for an activity, specifically when it comes to placing something that has to stay even just for a few hours in public space, then they always give you at best a response 48 hours or 24 before. So it can still change. Like last year, there was some rain during the days in which we're supposed to have, again, like sound walk with the Islam Shabana along a Khitara. And at the last moment, the authorities were, no, you cannot do that because you're gonna, it's too dangerous because people can fall inside the thing, and might have been true, but until the last moment, you never know whether it's also an excuse or not. So it's just playing by ear and adapting to the conditions. But at large, what is the experience is that there has been always so much positive response actually from not necessarily always a sort of indistinct audience, but when we do decide to, let's say, run an activity within a small garden. Or one of the first images that I shared, it's this quite brilliant, very playful project that Leila Hida did in the first edition of Sharita, and it was a pop-up studio, photographic studio in the middle of Jamal Fna, which is the symbol of a quite distorted image of Marrakesh in a way. And that it was historically one of the main squares where all the storytellers and all the halkas would gather, and they still do. But today it's a hyper-regulated, visibly regulated space where only certain things can happen in the way in which the authorities want it to happen, because it's again and again a reproduction of an image of a postcard that has to be sold. And so Leila wanted to really shift the camera around, and she created this pop-up studio where with an extremely kitsch photographic background with palm trees and camels, and she involved the people working already as artists on the square to become the photographers, and to sort of try to invite primarily tourists to sit and be taken, being portrayed instead of the constant, eating through image taking and image making that generally happens the way around. And what happened is that most tourists would just escape, like run away as fast as they could. And even though in that photo there were two collaborators that did take the photo, but that became a place where most people working on the square, they took their own portraits in the end. And it became somewhat a slightly different thing. This last year, we ran not all the activities, but a lot of the interventions and workshops and installations within one of the very few tiny gardens, small parks that still exist in the Medina, which is today like really, there is almost zero green space, and that tiny park is never used by children, for instance, because it's very poorly taken care of. There is no security guard or guardian, and so actually it's mostly drunk people and couples and people that want to smoke that go there. So neither children nor women would generally go there, and because we sort of took over, it really became their playground for those 48 hours where we were there. And again, that wasn't necessarily what we expected or at first, and the let's say audience that we imagined wasn't necessarily only the children of the neighborhood, but in the end that what happened. We all ended up babysitting extensively for them. And sometimes we try to do, sometimes we don't get authorizations, and we evaluate whether we want to take the risk or not to do something, and who can take that risk too, because the repercussions of what I face are not the same of the repercussions of somebody else. If the police comes up and says, "What are you doing? Do you have authorizations or not?" So I think that there is that aspect that has to be taken into account. But yeah, it is not easy. We're not. There is a few projects, at least in Marrakesh, and I know that there are others across Morocco that have done like really incredible work in trying to exist primarily in public space. But it is a very complicated. It's extremely demanding. Like challenge, basically.
Thank you so much. I think you disappeared for a moment, Sahar. I ask just a last call for any question, because I feel like there was a very attentive but silent audience tonight. Yet again, if you have, maybe on the other way around, if you, Francesca Shema, have a question for Sahar, it could be like a bit of a closure.
I don't know if I have, I mean, of course, there could be plenty of questions. First of all, I have a comment in the sense that it's really fantastic, the work that you do, and I just wish, I mean, we actually will have some time to spend together and get to know each other a little bit more. But I think I just wish like mobility across was easier, in the sense that I would love for the women of Dar Bellage to, you know, to come and spend some time at Sakiya. And of course, it's utopistic at this stage. But yeah, I mean, I'm just very much looking forward to find ways to navigate across all of this.
Yeah. Wow. That's so touching what you said, because I feel first, like, of course, everything we do is very political, and sometimes it's more political here than other places. But I think in general, when it comes to working in public space, collective work, and ecology, it's always political. But what you said about like wishing that the women from Morocco would come to Palestine, it hit me for a second that we sometimes forget that this should have been natural, that this should have been the case, that we move and share, and it's incredibly unnatural that people don't move. I mean, we started nomadically because we also, like, not just because we wanted to work in several places, but also because we understand the need for that people had in the past to actually move and to tread like lightly on the land, and to be in different places at different times, and maybe allow for different parts to heal and different parts to move. And even this movement created these intersections and interactions and this imagination that you're a lot more inspired when you move than when you're sitting. And I think that like our politics, of course, force us to stay in one place, and not even stay, but just like compounding and consolidating and like forcing us into tiny areas where we're not allowed to move and look outside. And our imagination is also like suffering, and sacrificing that has been really difficult. And so like part of what you're doing and part of what our doing is also like expanding these connections and these imaginations, but also these these connections also outside of even where we work. And it's really incredible. Just like something like this today is very important, I think. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I have to say that it's really something that we come back to all the time. I'm thinking about especially the broader, I would say, Arab words. The fact that normally, very often really, there is not possibility of encounter outside of the third party that can be Europe or the States, and in general the West, which is of course, it's a very, is a thing that has very dark reasons. But so much as we can try and make space also for encounter when we have the capacity of hosting in the West, in Europe, I think it should be a commitment, truly. So this little conversation is a way of getting together, have this conversation in a less private manner. Hopefully just to open up a conversation that can happen then in a physical space when we can as you were saying, Sahar, celebrate together and walk around and eat and do all the things that make the space of encounter really active. So hopefully we will meet again very soon, somewhere physical. Thank you very much, truly, for your brilliant presentation, for sharing such intense, layered work, and everybody for attending, and truly appreciate and extremely grateful. So enjoy the rest of your evening, nights, mornings, and till very soon.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Thank you very
And
much.
thank you, Clara. Clara from UNIDEE. Clara Emerge is the project manager of this crazy endeavor. And thank you very much for your passion always, Clara.
Thanks to
Thank
you,
you so
Chiara.
much.
Thanks to everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you very soon. Bye-bye.